It's alive! The second episode, and live not alive, but you get the gist. So let's see what's in it. Dark Fusion is a single-player space-themed shoot-'em-up. It has 4 levels, each divided into 3 small sub-areas: a combat zone, an alien zone and flight zone. In combat zone you're on foot, going from left to right, fighting and avoiding the aliens, preferably fighting, cause why not. Some of them will drop power-ups, so make sure to not leave these behind. There are entry points in the combat zone that lead to alien zones, and you must enter at least 2 of these and eradicate all aliens within to be able to complete the combat zone, and start moving towards the final flight zone, in which you fly the spaceship fighting the enemies above ground. This is also where you encounter bosses. Graphics and sounds are pretty decent, though nothing spectacular, and gameplay is okay. And that's probably the worst thing about Dark Fusion, that it just is. Not good, not bad, just somewhere in between, in purgatory of game scoring. Curse of the Azure Bonds is a second in SSI's series of gold box role-playing games, and a direct sequel to Pool of Radiance. Same as in predecessor, the exploration takes place in pseudo-3D, first-person view, and encounters happen on a top-down map with turn-based combat where you can control all characters separately and not a singular unit like in Traversal. What's new in this second outing though are the 2 new classes of Paladin and Ranger. Ability to dual class for human characters and higher level for magic users, allowing them to use 5th level AD&D spells. Goldbox games are never the easiest nor most approachable for new players, but nearly always are incredibly fun and rewarding when you seriously get into them. One of my biggest regrets of my gaming life, in fact, is that while I tried most if not all of them at one point or another, I never completed either. And perhaps I should when I win a lottery and have all the time in the world to make videos for this channel and play games. What? Thanks, Bruce. Batman has kindly pointed out to me that I have much bigger chances of dying from fiery diarrhea while riding a horse through North Pole, being chased by a polar bear, than winning the lottery. So yeah. Demon's Kiss is a C64 exclusive and a flick-screen adventure beat-em-up in which you play as a shirtless barbarian type of a warrior, traversing through a mysterious castle fighting off various demons and creatures to rescue a beautiful maiden Alicia from the proverbial claws of a very non-proverbial demon harpy. You know, your basic theme of any 80s fantasy hero flick. Interestingly enough, Demon Harpy is what my current boss's wife is in real life. She's heartless, has no respect for anyone, and acts as if the world was her own and she was the main character in the game called Life, when in reality she's just a passing fart in a story of someone else, anyone really that she meets. Even though she will be remembered by all that ever met her, immortalized in their memories as a creature like no other, all because of how awful and unfriendly she is. Her only achievement in history will be marrying an industrious fellow and spawning his demon child, which funny enough is growing up to be even worse. Anyway, you're armed with magical flay that can be used in melee or to launch the ball of the chain in magical homing attack. You can also punch and kick if necessary, though it shouldn't really be. Every now and then on your way to the harpy you'll face stronger demon enemies and they need to be done for you to progress. As soon as you kill the harpy, however, you can escape the castle to save Alicia. Graphically, Demon's Kiss is very impressive and plays great too, so if you like Rastan type games, you'll love it. Destroyer Escort is another C64 exclusive and another amazing game. This time, however, it's a naval simulation from Microprose Software where you portray a commander of a destroyer during World War II in North Atlantic escorting ships between ports. And you have to complete 6 of these escorts to quote-unquote beat the game. So as you start, you're presented with 6 routes between US, UK, Gibraltar and Murmansk to choose from, and ability to pick the difficulty level by deciding how heavy will be the enemy presence on your way. The game is played in first-person perspective on different screens, each responsible for a different part of running a destroyer. So there's the bridge, which is your de facto command center from which you visit other screens. Then there's the map, self-explanatory, navigational screen where you actually steer the ship and have access to radar showing nearby area. Stats and damage shows precisely that, your stats and damage to particular areas of the ship. In weapons screen you control 2 types of guns, torpedoes and depth charges to defend the convoy and yourself. Destroyer Escort is really fun if you like realistic naval simulations and don't mind games that are over 30 years old. But I suppose if you didn't enjoy all this, you wouldn't be watching this video now, would you? Let me start by saying that I feel the same way about Dizzy games Batman feels about cottage cheese. He strongly believes that it's offensive calling it cheese if he can't melt it on his toasts. I know, it's odd having such strong feeling about something so unimportant, but on the other hand I dislike Dizzy games. Don't know why, there's no reason to do so really, especially that these games tend to be universally loved, but I do. Treasure Island is set on a surprise Treasure Island, and is the second title in the long-running series of mostly adventure platformer games. Your aim is to leave the island and you can do it twofold, either by finding treasures and exchanging them for parts of the boat that you'll build, or by, well, also finding gold coins, 30 of them to be precise, and bribing your way out of the island. There's a lot of game in this DayZ as not many others offered more than one way to complete them, and if I liked DayZ games, I would have definitely recommended this one to you. Since I don't, all I can say is give it a chance and make up your own mind about it. Oh, and interestingly enough, as my assistant is suggesting, this time, unlike in other DayZ games, DayZ is a fresh egg and not a hard-boiled one. Meaning there's no HP meter so that DayZ can lose a life more easily. Keep that in mind. D.N.A. Warrior is an average horizontally scrolling shoot 'em up. It's so middle of the road in fact that I cannot really decide if it's good or bad. It sits somewhere in between and just is. But since the premise is kinda interesting, I decided to feature it in the video anyway. And while I am of strong belief that plot in shoot 'em ups is unnecessary, this one's special, as it could have been a decent base for a weak B movie. And those that have been following this channel for a while know how much I love movies that are so bad that they're actually ironically good. Anyway, a crazy professor injected you with a special D.N.A. and D.N.A. accelerator of his creation to make you more intelligent, which in itself is just an insult. I mean, you, my dear viewer, are one of the most intelligent, brilliant, creative, wise, not to mention good-looking folks out there. Cause if you wouldn't be here watching. And you are. Fact. Anyway, as I was saying, you were injected, but as soon as the D.N.A. and accelerator were about to do their magic whatever, sudden explosion in the lab sent Professor into coma. How do we know that it did just by looking at him? Simple. Like I said, you're uber intelligent. You know those things ad hoc. The thing is, the D.N.A. adite cannot be accelerated continuously, as it will eventually cause your brain's explosion. I know, sounds crazy, but here you go. Game logic. So this time, you're not just one to save the day, you're also one to be saved. To do so you'll be flying, or more likely swimming/steering a technologically shrunk ship through your veins and arteries to save your own life. You could say that you're a damsel in distress and a knight on a white horse all rolled into one. As you go about the whole process trying to find and collect 8 pieces of growth inhibitor, you'll be attacked by the white blood cells and other nondescript parts of your inner body. I told you the premise was unusual. Anyway, you'll find plasma spheres along the way to upgrade your ship and weapons, and have to keep an eye for keys that open some of the intercellular junctions. Now, I know I said that the game was in an odd place between good and bad, and the plot sounds beyond ridiculous, but the music is actually pretty good. And also devs had just a month to make the game start to finish. And if you ever worked on one, you should know that that's not something that should ever be attempted on such a short time budget. And for that alone, it's an achievement, even if one that's not particularly great. Would you believe that the aliens attacked the Earth once more? Yep, they did. And you're the only one who can save it. Dominator is a horizontally scrolling shooter with one first level being vertical. And can you imagine that when you save the Earth, all you'll get is a well done? Yep, that's pretty much it. No animation, no story, and not even a wall of text. Just well done. Other than that, Dominator is your average shooter with decent graphics and sounds and some standard for the genre weapon upgrades. It's a fun game in between other, better shooters, but I wouldn't make an evening out of it. In first Double Dragon you were saving your girlfriend, Marianne. In this, second, she's been murdered and you're out for revenge on the Black Warriors who've done it, 1980s style. And as ports from arcades go, this one's not bad. Better than the first game. There are 5 levels in it and quite a wide selection of moves for Commodore in 1989. There is a kick, punch, back elbow, spinning and flying kicks. The enemies are not very varied, but at least there's a lot of them, and you can play in 2-player co-op, which makes Double Dragon much more fun. Especially when some unplanned shenanigans occur, like hitting each other instead of an enemy. There are some simple weapons here and there, like balls on chains and darts, but while helpful, they're not necessary to complete the game. If you like the genre, you'll like Double Dragon 2, despite most bosses looking like Sloth from the Goonies. Dragon Ninja aka Bad Dudes vs Dragon Ninja is a beat-em-up originating from the arcades. President Ronnie, yes, you heard that right, Ronnie, has been kidnapped by the ninjas, and you also heard that right, ninjas, and you have to save him. In the arcades there could be 2 of you simultaneously beating the living shit out of baddies, on C64 it's just you alone. It's not something you can't handle, but it's more fun fighting hundreds of enemies with a friend. The game takes place over 6 levels, each ending with a boss and each composed out of 2 layers, the lower and the top ones. And you can move between them by jumping or using ladders. There aren't many moves and attacks in Dragon Ninja and the controls take a bit getting used to, and you will have to get accustomed with them if you plan on succeeding. Graphics are fantastic. I know, some of you will disagree, but compare the character and enemy sprites in Dragon Ninja to those we just saw in Double Dragon. It's crazy. Here they're high-res, colorful and smoothly animated, and there they look like clay monsters molded by a 5-year-old high on out-of-date milk. But I suppose it may have something to do with Dragon Ninja's world being flat and Double Dragons allowing for moving in and out within the floor of each stage. All in all, Dragon Ninja is a fun game, and especially so if you like the genre. Dragon Wars is unofficially considered to be a spiritual successor to Bard's Tale games. But it's much bigger, much more feature-packed, much better and a more difficult game overall. Story-wise, it takes place in the land of Dilmun, transformed into monster-filled nightmare by a villain of the game, Namtar. You start with a party of 4 that has no weapons and no armor, nothing, and has to find a way not only to gear up, but most importantly defeat Namtar. In the process restoring the magic to the land so that the casters could use it once more. The game is played in first-person 3D view and combat is turn-based, same as in Bard's Tale. There are over 20 different skills in the game that you can develop and most importantly use. These are magical, weapon and personal skills. There's no level limitation in Dragon Wars, so while you start as a cockroach, fighting for your life when in combat with even the weakest enemies, if you persevere and play well, you may end up with your characters all being Neo from the Matrix, so superior beings that are beyond stopping by anyone or anything in existence. Interestingly enough, you can at any point restart the game and use your own characters from your current save with all their levels and gear intact. Provided that they're still alive, that is. But if that wasn't enough, the freedom of choice and non-linear story is unprecedented in Dragon Wars as compared to games of the time. You don't have to go from point A to B to C and so on to complete the game. You can do anything in any order you'd like if you only managed to. Even the first city you start the game in, Purgatory, there's like 4 or 5 ways you can leave it. You can escape through Underworld or by swimming to freedom, you can fight your way through the main gate if you manage, or sell yourself through Slave Market. The possibilities are endless. So if you're looking for a deep and involving RPG that could challenge the best we have now in terms of its inner quality, cause graphics wise it's obviously ancient, there's no better choice. While Test Drive 2 was clearly superior to the original, it was at the very best an iterative upgrade that just made things a bit better without changing the formula too much. Why change what works, you'd ask? Well, there's no reason really, other than innovation that is, and developers apparently did not care enough to innovate. Refreshed, it seems, was just good enough for them. Anyway, personally, I feel that in any Test Drive game you just spend way too much time looking at the broken windscreen wondering what went wrong rather than racing. And yeah, I understand that it tried to be a simulation and not an arcade racer, and for the most part it's probably one of the best semi-realistic simulations of 1989 on C64, but it doesn't mean that it's a great game. Well, at the very least it looks pretty decent and was quite popular, so clearly there was an audience for it. Fighter Bomber aka Strike Aces is a flight combat simulation where you'll get to fly one of 6 different planes against 7 different enemy aircraft and land targets in series of 16 unique missions. The graphics are pretty nice and look quite good given C64's capabilities. That said, the framerate is terrible. I'm sure you could count FPS on one of your hand's fingers. And this is as much as I will tell you about the game, because I have an intermission prepared for you. Pause the video and go to lemon64.com website, type in the game's name and click on top left in the review link. Why? Because the programmer who made the game reviewed it himself. It's not a long read and it's definitely not one praising his own creation, but it's interesting to see how the inner workings of the machine that made the game possible were running, and the story behind its creation. You'll thank me later. Or you won't, cause it's the internet and everyone seems to be doing whatever they feel like doing. Fire King is probably least known and most deserving to be known arcade game out of this whole video. It's a follow-up, a superior successor to Demon Stalkers we spoke about in one of the previous videos. It's essentially a Gauntlet clone but on steroids. It's also more leaning towards the action RPG form of gameplay than straight up plain top-down corridor shooter original was. There are 6 different characters to choose from and each specializes in one of the 3 disciplines of strength, magic or armor. You and a buddy of yours will traverse various different areas in time, from plain landscapes through towers and dungeons to even rivers. The areas are bigger than before, filled with various unique bodies, some of which are especially deadly like black slime, and there are numerous different items and spells that can be found to help you on your way. There are also traps and puzzles all throughout it to spice up the gameplay. Story-wise, the city of Stormhaven Bay, that was protected by 4 mages each responsible for a different element, fire, earth, water and wind, has had its fire mage killed, lost its defenses, and now the monsters roam the land and attack the townspeople. You set off to defeat the monsters and restore the peace to the kingdom. Fire King is fast, action-packed and amazing. Probably the best Gauntlet-like game. Better than original if you have someone to play it with. And I wholeheartedly recommend it. Conceptually, Firepower seems like a game that should work. It's a tank game where one tank faces off another and it's best played in 2-player versus mode, as otherwise it's just meh. But why? Why isn't it as fun as we'd hope a tank game to be? Well, I have someone here that would like to chime in. Go on, Bruce.
I'm Batman.
Wow, thank you, Bruce. Your insights are, well, yeah. Anyway, let me try to explain. The graphics are not great but good enough. The sounds are there but don't make especially great impression, and gameplay, well, gameplay is there if you have a friend with you. Then each of you tries to capture the flag from another's base and bring it back to yours. All the while fighting off turrets and helicopters alike. It can actually be fun for a little while played like that. In single player, the game is disappointingly boring and there's no added multiplayer fun to cover up bad scrolling. All in all, try it out with a friend and skip it if you are alone. Firestrike is a C64 exclusive and a flight combat arcade shooter. Basically an afterburner we deserved but never got on Commodore's little machine that could. You're Tom Cruise in Top Gun. First or second, irrelevant, you're him. And you fly F-16 completing 8 different scenarios, from these in Middle East to those in Russia. Objectives don't vary that much however, and you basically have to kill all enemies that pop up to progress to the next mission. You refuel and pick armament before each one, and you have to pick well as not all weapons are as effective against certain enemies as others are. What's worth pointing out are the excellent graphics with their faux 3D effect, and sense of speed when fighting in the skies. Firestrike is super fun, and if you felt slightly disappointed with C64's port of Afterburner, it's definitely the right choice to fill in for that title. Forgotten Worlds originated in the arcades and is a horizontally scrolling shooter for up to 2 players. You control one of 2 dudes flying with a jetpack and shooting any manner of monstrosities, machines and random things to progress within the game and defend the planet known as Dust World. That apparently, according to the game's story, used to be Earth. Our Earth. Your main task is to get to the so-called BIOS, an evil and twisted being that's responsible for the planet's poor state. Some enemies drop coins that when collected can be used in between the levels in shop to purchase upgrades. As you might have noticed by now, the game is beautiful. I wouldn't go as far as to say it's arcade perfect, cause it's nowhere near that, but it's definitely one of the better looking titles of 1989. Sprites are big and smoothly animated, backgrounds are detailed and thematically correct, and overall the game feels when looking at it like a near masterpiece. Sadly, same cannot be said about the controls and difficulty. First is odd, clunky and requires getting used to. I mean, when you eventually grasp them to the point that you'd feel comfortable, the game will gain a new life for you, as it will stop feeling that you keep dying not out of your own fault. And that's where we get into the second issue, difficulty. Forgotten Worlds on C64 is unforgiving. It drops enemies on you from both sides, often quite a few of these at once, and at times it just feels impossible to get through them without dying. And it is the case, I'm afraid. It's also why the game is best played with a friend in simultaneous multiplayer where you can both watch each other's backs. Let me start by saying that Galdregon's domain, aka Deathbringer, has an epic title screen. It looks like a fantasy book cover or a VHS type inlet straight from the 80s, which makes sense given when the game was released and what it is. Story-wise, the land of Mesron has befallen to an evil wizard Azazel, which coincidentally sounds like a name of one of the fallen angels, I think. I'm not sure, I'm not religious, but I believe I've seen it in a movie or something. And said wizard is searching for 5 gems that will grant him unlimited and ultimate power, not unlike Thanos was. It's easy to guess who has to stop him, right? Galdregon's domain is a first-person real-time role-playing with an epic story and uninspired combat. There's no animations of enemies attacking, so you only really can tell that they are by your HP bar going down. It's perhaps not something to detract you from playing, but definitely a little annoyance at least to me. Graphics are really nice, but sounds are your typical clanks and whooshes and nothing special, just adequate. But given the interesting plot, and especially if you're a fan of a genre, you should enjoy Galdregon's domain. Gemini Wing is a port from the arcades and a vertically scrolling shoot 'em up. As in most games in a genre, aliens have invaded Earth, and given that Batman hanged down his cape, you are the one to face them. And since you have no access to as sophisticated tech as he did, you're gonna face him in an old-timey propeller plane. What? It's a bit late now, isn't it? I'm sure if he knew he would... Oh, whatever man, you're not helpful at all. Better focus on those nachos, they're not gonna eat themselves. It's a bit late now, but Batman's saying that he would have lent you his Batplane if you'd asked before. He's having lunch now, so... Anyway, let's leave him in a sea of guac and salsa and get back to our game. Graphically, Gemini Wing is really nice. It features a lot of sprites on screen at once and richly detailed backgrounds, which would be fine if they all wouldn't crash together. So it's often difficult to distinguish background objects from enemy shots, and the screen has a tendency to flicker when there's too many sprites displayed at once. Not to mention the flashing that seems to be used often and for no reason really. Unless it's there to upset those who are sensitive to that. Then they've hit the jackpot. Other than that, if you get used to the aforementioned annoyances, it's actually a pretty fun and well-playing game, even if a tad too demanding for my liking. Ghouls and Ghosts is a follow-up to earlier Ghosts and Goblins, also action platformer that originated in the arcades and a much better game than the first one was. For one, it actually contains all 5 stages that the arcade has and all features from it too. Nearly nothing important was cut to save space or reduce the loading. If you wonder what I mean by that, watch the series episode for 1986. Then there's the enemy behavioral patterns and gameplay mechanics. All are moved to Commodore's system perfectly, within its power limitations that is. Graphics are pretty decent too, and quite arcade faithful with some small but notable omissions in some backgrounds and the main characters. Arthur's beard, or lack thereof. These are small sacrifices that do not impede the gameplay though, some only pointing them out for the sake of transparency. What is a serious downgrade from the arcade though is the inability of Arthur to turn while crouching, which may not sound like much when I say it, but it can actually cause you to die from time to time. And these deaths feel cheap, as they're not caused by your own faults. This is going to be a tough one to explain, which is odd because the game is actually pretty simple. There's a story to Grand Monster Slam, something about conflict between different races that led to numerous wars and battles, and since these were largely unresolved and carried on for years stupidly, when in time peace was finally achieved, all races decided to meet every year to celebrate it via a sports game resembling the pointless and victorious wars of yesteryears. The so-called Grand Monster Slam was born. It is composed out of 3 major parts: the main game, Revenge of the Bellums, Fulton Feeding, and penalty kicks, if necessary. These do not always happen though. In the main game you're pitted against another player from opposing team and you're both throwing bellums at each other. Bellums are small round furry creatures kinda resembling mugways before they turn into gremlins. The goal is to throw them so fast and well that all would end up on opponent's side, preferably by hitting him too, as each hit leaves him immobile for a few seconds. There are a couple of kinds of shots and even a provoking one, and they will take a moment getting used to, but the rules themselves are hella easy to grasp when actually playing. Then there's the Revenge of the Bellums, where you stand in the middle of the square area with a pole with shields on opposing 2 sides and have to repel bellum attacks for points. And finally, Fulton Feeding sees 6 Fultons sitting on differently high poles and you have to throw bellums at them to feed them. I know, Fulton is another stupid name you've never heard of and probably never will again, but if you wonder, they're green orc-like creatures with unusually high head-to-torso ratio. Penalties only happen if your opponent shot the bellum into the audience during the main game, and penalty taker decides where to throw bellum while defender which side to defend. If unsuccessful in defense, 3 bellums are added to the defender's side. And I realize, guys, that all that sounds beyond stupid, and there are a lot of names that have no meaning to you as they do not have any to me either. But it is what it is, and sounds way more complicated than it actually is when playing. So to summarize and simplify, Grand Monster Slam is a sports game that requires either learning the tropes of, or a single video worth watch of time to learn the rules by watching playthrough on YouTube. Second episode down and another set of pretty interesting games. What do you guys think? Any of these you played before? Maybe you plan on trying some out? Let me know in the comments below. If you liked the video, hit those like and subscribe buttons below. If you didn't, well then there's thumbs down there too, but I suppose you wouldn't have persevered up to this point if you really didn't. Around 60% of you are not subscribed, and there's currently no way of knowing if YouTube will decide to recommend you the next episode or not, other than subscribing and hitting the bell, that is. And that bell is pretty amazing, as whenever the new video is out, YouTube will actually send you small and friendly notification about it, so you wouldn't miss it. If you'd like to support the channel, Patreon and YouTube memberships are a great way of doing so. They will help me release better content, and also they get first dibs on all new videos before they're publicly accessible on YouTube. If you can't or don't want to do that though, likes and subscribes are great too. I would like to take a moment here and thank all the YouTube creators from whose videos short bits were taken to serve as a background to my commentary. They're all amazing and stars among the retro community, and deserve your subscription. They all have mine. You'll find the names of their channels at the top of the screen when their footage is running, and also in the video description below. Make sure to send them your love. For me though, this is all, so have a good one and I'll see you next time. Peace.